Abuse of prescription drugs by young people is on the rise, and the CSRA is not immune to this very real issue.
A lot of young people think prescription drugs are less risky because they're prescribed by a doctor. Preventing domestic violence, it is the goal of a panel comprised of some heavy hitters, the state's attorney general, law enforcement agencies, and advocacy groups.
Hi everyone. 4 years after the invasion of Iraq, it's a good time to take stock. Since the war began, 3,192 U.S. troops have been killed, more than 24,000 wounded. At least 50,000 Iraqi civilians have died.
It's war.
You may have done stuff, or something may have been done to you, or you were brought up a certain way, but that doesn't define you. The only thing that really defines you is who you say you are, and what God said, and who God says you are. And as long as you believe positively about yourself, and you are willing to step in and follow the call that God has put on your life, then you can become anything.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to the movement. This is War. We're all recovering. I'm your host, Striker. Today's episode is about rebuilding. Not the pretty part, not the finished product people clap for, but the part where everything fell apart. The part where, you had to face yourself, where you had to start all the way over. Some people run from that moment. Other people make something out of it. Today's guest is one of those people. Wesley Farnsworth is a man who lost almost everything: identity, direction, purpose. And instead of letting the story end there, he built himself up again, brick by brick, choice by choice, and day by day. Author of The Blueprint of Becoming, speaker, mentor, example of a life rebuilt with intention. Wesley, welcome to War, brother. Thanks for being here.
Man, thanks for having me, Striker. It's good to be with you.
Yes, sir. Let's dive right in, Wesley. Let's dive. I'm so excited about this. It's been a long time coming. I want to begin at the part most people skip. Not the rebuild, not the lessons, but the breakdown.
Shoot, what you got for me?
What was the moment where everything changed for you? The moment you knew something had to give up, had to give.
Yeah, man, I think it came after just time and time again of trying to do recovery myself, trying to admit that trying to take it and do it under my own power without the help of anybody else, so that I could keep that secret, so that I could maintain the mask that I was wearing, right? And so I think when I finally had hit that rock bottom moment where I realized, man, I can't do this myself. I can't, for whatever reason, can't shake it. And so something's got to change, right? I need to do something. And it was around that time that I was attending a church service, and they announced from the stage that they were starting this recovery ministry called Celebrate Recovery. And for those that aren't familiar, it's a Christ-centered 12-step recovery group, and they focus on all kinds of hurts, habits, and hang-ups. I like to say, if you're human, then you're qualified to go. Because typically when people think recovery, they think of drugs and alcohol. But only 1 in 3 people that go to Celebrate Recovery are there for drugs or alcohol. The rest of us, like myself, are there for things, like pornography addictions, or overeating, or broken relationships, or whatever it is. Just stuff that comes from being human. And it's just a Christ-centered program that points people back to Christ and gives them the tools and the community to be able to do it and walk in recovery together. And so that's kind of where my journey began, is when I realized I couldn't do it myself. And the church started the Celebrate Recovery ministry, and I was like, all right, this sounds cool. I probably should check it out. And I did eventually. It took me a little while. I had to build up the courage, because even going to a meeting, you know, means you have to identify that there's something wrong with you. No, nobody likes to admit that there's something wrong. But once I finally did it, my life changed.
Right. That's a big thing. You gotta, be able to be vulnerable and accept help. You can't do it alone. And when I realized that, everything changed for me personally. When I was able to accept help. So you're absolutely right. You can't do it alone. So what were you carrying inside that nobody around could see?
Yeah, I had a 20-year addiction to pornography, and it was something that nobody knew about. I kept it very well hidden. And when I was outside of the house, I wore masks, and I blended into my environments, and I could talk the talk. But at home, I wasn't walking the walk. I was keeping everything hidden from everybody. And honestly, at times I was even trying to keep it hidden from myself. I wasn't even willing to admit that I had a problem. Because like everybody else that's had anything to do with recovery, I'm sure at some point you've said, well, I can stop whenever I want. That's a pretty common phrase. And so, yeah, that's kind of the secret. The big secret was just the addiction that I had, that for a long time I wasn't willing or ready to admit.
Right. So in your life at your lowest point, we was talking about rock bottom just a second ago. Did you feel lost, numb, angry, or something else?
All of the above. I think when you hit that point, you're very, very frustrated. You're very angry that everything that you have done to combat this or to overcome this hasn't worked. I know for me that was the case. Like, I was just very frustrated that I wasn't able to defeat this thing on my own. And at times I was probably even angry with God. Hey, like, why are you not delivering me this? Why are you not doing what I'm asking? In reality, I know it's because I was trying to do both his job and mine. And that doesn't work. You have to just focus on yourself and let him do his part. And so that I would say, yes, I definitely felt like all of those when I was at rock bottom.
That's understandable completely. A lot of people never sit, still long enough to hear what their life is trying to tell them. I'm guilty of that, When everything got quiet for you, what did you hear within yourself?
Yeah, man, quiet.
Or settle down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really when things really started quieting down, and the recovery started. That's when I was able to really just focus, and I started to hear God a lot more. And I was able to really just focus on myself and focus on my recovery, and a lot of the noise that was being produced from the addiction went away, and so that gave me a lot of even clarity of mind, and I think that was a huge thing.
Okay. So what was the hardest truth you had to accept about you?
That I'm not perfect. That I'm broken just like everybody else. I grew up a pastor's kid, and so growing up in that role, I had a lot of self-imposed pressures. The feeling that I had to say it or be a certain way, say certain things, be looked at certain ways from other people, in order to make sure that I was reflecting well on my parents, reflecting well on the church, reflecting well on God. And so when I finally realized, you know what, I'm still human, and I still struggle with things just like everybody else. And it took me a while to be able to admit that there was still something wrong, that there was something I needed help with that I couldn't control. And that's a tough pill to swallow. And so when I was finally able to admit that, that was kind of the turning point.
Okay. Let's dive into your book a little bit.
Yeah.
Your book is The Blueprint of Becoming. Blueprint, means the structure, order, intentional design. What does becoming mean to you?
Yeah, growing up, I went through a lot of things. I had a lot of experiences, a lot of times where God showed up in our life and provided for my family and I, and so I talk about my testimony in those first couple chapters of the book, where I share some of the things that I went through growing up, some of the challenges that we faced, and I talk about my addiction and the other struggles that I've had, and my journey through all of that, and I talk about what life now looks like on the other side of it, and then I really focus a lot on sharing the stories of other people, other characters in the Bible that God used despite their past. There's a lot of times where the world will say, this is what you've done, and so because of that, you can't do this. You're disqualified. And so the goal of the book and the becoming part of it is just helping people realize that, yeah, you may have done stuff, or something may have been done to you, or you were brought up a certain way, but that doesn't define you. The only thing that really defines you is who you say you are, and what God said, and who God says you are. And as long as you believe positively about yourself, and you are willing to step in and follow the call that God has put on your life, then you can become anything. For me, I had a 20-year addiction, and so in my mind, that kept me from being able to do some things. I thought that I would never be a speaker. I would never be able to mentor people in areas of that deal with things like pornography. I would never be able to do, this or that. And as I began working my recovery, and I began realizing that, yeah, this stuff happened to me, and it is now a part of my story. But just because it's a part of my story doesn't mean that it defines me. And so now I'm stepping into my becoming, and there's a lot of things happening. And that's where the book came from, is I realized that, I liken it to a reference. If you've ever seen the movie A Knight's Tale, there's a scene in the movie where there's a knight parading down the road, and he's in full armor, and the young boy is sitting on the side, and he looks to his dad and he says, "Dad, I want to be him when I grow up." And of course the dad is like, "Yeah, you can do that. You can do anything you want," like any parent would do, encouraging their kid to dream big. And of course there's this guy nearby that has to give his unsolicited advice and says, "You can't do that. You're just a peasant boy. You can't change your stars." And so I remember hearing one night at a Celebrate Recovery meeting, somebody gave their testimony, and that scene, whatever they said, that scene began playing in my head. And as that scene started playing in my head, God started putting this message saying, yeah, you know what? You are all like that peasant boy. You're all broken. You all are peasants. You're all struggling. But when you give whatever that thing is that you're struggling with over to me, when you accept me as your savior, you now are changing your stars, and you are now becoming like that knight. You're becoming a part of the kingdom, a part of the royal family, and you're changing your stars. You're not letting your past define you. And so as I began to unpack that over the years, that became the basis for the book.
Okay, you rebuilt yourself. I like that. And when you started rebuilding your identity, what was step one? Was that step one?
The first step was forgiving myself. And the second step was accepting God's forgiveness. Because it took a while for me to be able to forgive myself for the struggles that I had. And essentially to forgive myself for being human.
That's deep. That's really deep. What daily disciplines change your life the most, you think?
For me, it all boils down to community and ensuring that I am working on my faith and my recovery every day. So let me break that down for you a little bit. On the faith side of it, there are 4 things that I always try and do every single day. And that first one is when I'm listening to music. I don't listen to much secular music. I always try and listen to worship music or the Christian radio station so that I'm being fed biblical truths and wisdom. And that just helps keep me centered and focused. The second thing is I always try to be in the Word in some way, shape, or form every day. Sometimes that means reading my Bible. Sometimes it's just a devotional. But in some way, shape, or form, I try and read something biblically based every single day. The third one is prayer. A lot of people I've talked to, they're like, man, prayer is only for special occasions and mealtime. And that's not the case. Prayer is supposed to be a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week thing. You talk to God like he's your friend, and you just have 2-way conversations with him and be honest with him and share about what you're going through. Share your struggles, because he already knows what they are. He just is waiting for you to admit them and be honest with him. And so I've made that a priority in my life. And then the fourth one is community. And that's where we'll go down into this. When you think about recovery is best done with other people in your circle. You have those accountability teams. I liken it to the gym. We're approaching here a month and a half or so is the beginning of the new year. Everyone's going to be making New Year's traditions, resolutions, and most of them, probably the most common one is that I'm going to go to the gym and lose all this weight.
Yes.
And so people go to the gym and they have some success for a little while, and then after a month or 2 they stop going for one reason or another, and the gym is making now all this money from your subscription because you forgot to cancel it or you're locked into a contract, and so they don't have success because they tried to do it themselves. But when they find community and they now take this resolution on with a friend, and now this 1 or 2 additional friends, you're now committed to each other that you're going to meet each other at the gym, 1, 2, 3 days a week, whatever it is. Now you have community. You have somebody to keep you accountable, to encourage you, and likewise you them, because neither one of you want to disappoint the other person. You don't want to be the person that is the reason that you failed your resolution. And the same principle applies with recovery when you're trying to beat, whether it be an addiction or a hurt or a habit or whatever it is. You have to have community. If you try and do it yourself, the chances of success go down because you're just relying on your own power. And so when it comes to me, like, I always try and make sure that I'm surrounded by people that are recovery focused and Christ focused. I take my relationships with people that I built within Celebrate Recovery outside of the meeting and into life. And I build relationships and friendships with these people so that I have a good basis to do not only do life on, but when you have a friendship with somebody and you have a relationship with somebody, it's a lot easier to call them when you're maybe in a moment of weakness and you're wanting to do something that you know you shouldn't be able to do, because now you have this piggy bank, if you will, of a relationship built up that you can withdraw from, and it's a lot easier to make those kinds of calls. And so those are the types of things that I do, and because of that, I believe very, very, very strongly in the importance of community, especially when it comes to recovery. And so when it comes to my book, I've developed a guide that takes my book and it actually turns it into a 10-week study where you can go through it with friends, whether it be one person or 5 to 10 people, and you go through the book chapter by chapter, 1 week at a time, and you unpack not only what I'm talking about in the book, but I provide questions both in the book and outside the book in the guide that you go through and you answer, and you begin to unpack your own life. And through that, you start to identify areas of your life that maybe need to change in order to step into your becoming. And now, because you're doing this together as a group, you have an accountability team right there beside you already, because you're going through this journey together. And so you can begin to share some, one or two of those things that you've identified, and now you can encourage them, and they in turn can encourage you to help keep you accountable as you walk through this road. And that guide that I have written, I provide free of charge to anybody that wants to go through the book with the group. I provide both a leader's guide and a participant's guide. So it makes it everything is done for you. You just have to show up and do it.
That is pretty awesome, Wesley. I love that. That's awesome. Which brings me, since we're on that topic, how can someone build a version of themselves that can weather storms?
That's something that takes time. It takes time and practice and commitment. And honestly, I go back to the community aspect. When you're in the midst of things, and especially if you're walking in your becoming and you're walking the path and into who God wants you to be, the enemy, the devil doesn't want that to happen. And he's going to do everything he can to keep you in your sin, in your hurts, your habits, your hang-ups. He's going to do everything he can to keep you there, because when you're there, he has some control over you. And so there's going to be temptations, and there's going to be struggles, and there's going to be hard times coming. And those times, and I can say this from experience, those times are a lot easier to weather when you have a solid community around you that is going to help keep you focused not only on your recovery, but on your faith. Because it's really easy to get distracted and fall off course. I use the illustration in my book of stars. When you think about old celestial times, sailors would guide and navigate their ships using stars as a constellation. And so in my book, I reference, I use that as an illustration, and how every decision that we make, every relationship we have, our job, everything we do is a star in our constellation. And what's important is what our North Star is. And for me and anybody in faith, then your relationship with God should be your North Star. He should be your North Star and should be your your guidance for everything that you do. And so if that's not the case, then that tells you that something within your constellation needs to be shifted to make him your North Star, right? There's decisions that need to be made, things that need to change in order to ensure that you are focused on where you should be going. And then the rest will take care of itself as you begin to do that. And so to answer your question, I go back, the easiest way to navigate those hard times and make sure that you're successful is to have a solid community in your corner to support you and make sure you're pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, a good support circle. I love it. I love it. And every rebuild, has something deeper behind it. Where did faith enter your journey?
Faith has always been a part of my journey. Growing up, like I said, I was a pastor's kid, so I grew up in the church, so faith has always been a part of my life. But it wasn't until within the last probably 10 years, 6 to 10 years, that faith really started becoming my own. It's really easy as a child, especially in teenager, to have the faith, but to basically be riding your parents' coattails and living off of their faith. And so as I became an adult, my faith continued, and I still continued going to church and doing all of those things, and God still was with me and provided for me and everything. But I was still also trying to do things on my own. I was still kind of probably testing God and saying, okay, like where does my power stop and yours begin? And so it wasn't until the last 6 years, 7 years or so that I hit that rock bottom moment, and I realized I can't do this on my own. That I would say my faith really started becoming my own and got me to where I am now.
Yes, sir. So how did purpose show up? Gradually, or was it like in a single moment?
I'm sorry, what? Purpose?
Your purpose, right?
Yeah.
You realize your purpose.
That has been a long road, and that's still, that's all a part of your becoming. For me, the stories, my purpose, my becoming started with the movie of The Knight's Tale and that scene replaying in my head. That started my journey, and that was back in 2019. And it took me a while, because for a while I've kind of fought the idea, and then after a year or so, the idea that this needs to be a book kind of came to my mind. And so I started it, but I kind of was, I wasn't all in. And so I would write a little bit and I'd stop, and I'd write a little bit and I'd stop, and I'd kind of go, back and forth. And so, but that was where my road started. It was kind of bumpy at first. But then, over the last couple of years, and really I would say even just within this year, the road really started to smooth out a little bit. My purpose started becoming more clear. And I finished the book. And when I finished the book, I really started hearing from God again in more pronounced ways. And he has started laying out kind of my path and where he wants me to go. And so I have been taking a lot of steps and doing a lot of things that are now leading me down that path.
Okay. All right. So it sounds kind of like both. Like it was in that single moment when you seen The Knight's Tale, and then along the way it kind of kept building up.
Yeah. It's not an overnight thing, and I don't think anybody's going to say, yeah, I just woke up one day and I knew this is what I was going to do and everything was hunky dory.
Right.
It's a gradual thing, and that's definitely my case.
Okay, that's understandable. So how does someone begin discovering their calling, when they feel like they have none?
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes back to your faith, and it comes back to being willing to examine yourself. For me, it started with the self-examination. It started with working through my recovery and identifying the areas of my life that needed to change in order to make sure that I was following the North Star properly, that I've talked about earlier. And then once those changes began to be made, and I started examining those areas, then faith became stronger because I was now following the North Star, the correct North Star, and my purpose started to become clearer. And so it's a gradual thing, and if you're struggling with that, then I would say that's what you need to do, is begin first with an inward examination, while at the same time working on strengthening your faith, and working on those two things together.
Okay. Noted. And when we grow, our relationships change. Sometimes that's beautiful, sometimes it's painful. How did rebuilding yourself change the relationships in your life?
Yeah, relationships are finicky. Sometimes relationships have to fade away in order to ensure that you're following your North Star properly. And sometimes they just need to change. I like to say, when you think about change, you have to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. If as an example, if you're trying to stop eating fast food, right? And you have a friend that always wants fast food. Well, then either A, he or she needs to be eliminated, so that eliminated from your life, so that temptation isn't always there, or just a conversation needs to be had and be like, look, here's what I'm trying to do. I understand that you love it, but it's not for me anymore at this point in my life. So I need you to respect that, right? And just have those types of conversations. And then if they're a good friend, then they should be able to honor that and respect it, and you're fine. But sometimes it's a little bit harder than that, especially if it's somebody like family. Like if we'll just say we'll switch to maybe you're trying to do something like I don't know, you're trying to make a better decision about how to do things, and you're trying to make sure that they're biblically based, or Christ-centered, and now you have a family that the rest of your family is not, they're not Christ followers. They don't believe. Well, I'm not telling you to cut your family out of your life, because that's not healthy. Like, family needs to be a part of your life in some way, shape, or form. However, they can be a part of your life and not have decision-making power in your life. I'd like to think of circles. You have, 4, 5, 6 circles, and those people that are in line with what you want, that are following the same North Star, and are going to get you to where you want to go, then they're your really close friends. They're the ones that are in that inner circle that when they say something, you listen and you consider it. And if your family isn't in that circle because they're not pointing you in the same direction, then they need to move out a circle or two to where you hear them and they're in your life, but what they say has less power. It has less weight in your mind. And so you can say, you know what, I appreciate that advice, and then you just kind of let it go in one ear, out the other. Or you say, you know what, right now I'm not really looking for advice. This is something I just need to do on my own. Right. And so, so that's kind of how relationships fit into the whole thing. they're finicky, and it just depends on the situation, and it depends on who that person is as to how they change.
Kind of like, you got to keep them at a distance, You just got to keep them over here, if they're not in that circle of, helping your growth in a positive, way. I was just speaking about that. Yep. So what does a healthy relationship look like when you're healing?
Yeah, you know what? And for me, it goes back to making sure that we're both pointed in the right direction. A healthy relationship, you both have the same goal in mind. You're both trying to follow the same North Star. You're both focused on your recovery. You're both focused on Christ. And when you have those same goals in mind, the rest of the things kind of start to work themselves out, and you have a healthy relationship. But when that is not the case and you're both not focused on the same things, then you're no longer in a healthy relationship, and that's when turmoil and things like that start to take place.
Excellent. So how does vision play into maintaining growth?
Yeah, and you know what? Vision is important. It's like driving a car. When you're driving a car, you have to have vision to know where you're going. I know that I need to go to Walmart. Okay, so now you have to visualize the map. You have to visualize how you have to or wherever you're going. Maybe you're going to a restaurant, whatever it is. But you have to have a vision, and you have to kind of know where you're going. And then as you're going, you have to visualize the road ahead of you to make sure you don't hit anything or run into, or somebody run into you or whatever the case may be. And recovery is the same way, and life is the same way. You have to know where your final destination is. Okay, I know this is where I want to go. So now let me look at my path and figure out how I'm going to get there. And now that you have that path laid out, now you can focus on the road right ahead of you and make sure that you're avoiding the speed bumps, or going slow over the speed bumps, or nothing's going to come at you and hit you as you go. And so you have to have a vision to ensure that you get where you're going to go.
Yep, I agree 100%. That's perfect feedback, perfect answer. Your journey, Wesley, it didn't end with personal transformation. It evolved into service, which I love, into reaching back for others still in the fire. When did you realize your story wasn't just for you, but it was for others?
Yeah, my story, when I started going through recovery and I had success and I had worked the 12 steps completely and stuff, I started sharing my testimony and what I'd gone through, just within Celebrate Recovery, going and doing my testimony in places. And I was getting a lot of good feedback on it. And I just kind of left it there because I'm still in recovery circles, right? I'm still in that safe place where I have an anonymity and I have confidentiality. And it wasn't until the idea of the book started kind of coming to me that I began wrestling with the idea of now sharing my testimony outside of the recovery arena, where I don't have the anonymity and the confidentiality. And that took me a little while to come to terms with, where I'm like, God, I don't know that I want to do this. Part of one of my struggles is codependency. And codependency means caring about what other people think about you more than what you care about yourself or what Christ thinks of you. And so admitting that I'm a broken person and that I had this addiction outside of recovery means that I'm now admitting essentially to the world this thing, and I have no control over what they think of me or what they say of me or anything along those lines. And so that was kind of a tough pill to swallow for a while. But then as I began really praying on it and stuff, I realized that, yeah, I can't do that, but I also can't deny that I was unable to do this myself. And it was only with Christ's help that he was able to do it through me. which is a miracle in and of itself. And so why would I keep that a secret? It happened to me. The addiction happened to me. It's a part of me. And while I'm not proud of it, I also can't deny that it's a part of my story. And so as I began praying and realizing that this is the route that I'm supposed to go, then I started to realize, okay, maybe if I share my testimony, maybe if I share the things that I've gone through, the struggles that I've had, then maybe, just maybe, somebody listening to a podcast someday, or somebody listening to a speech that I give, when I come and speak at an event or whatever, maybe it'll resonate with somebody, and they will either realize that they need to stop what they're doing, or they're going to go down that road too, or maybe it'll give them the courage to step up and say, hey, I have this problem too, and then they can begin their road into recovery.
I'm really feeling this. You cooking, Wesley. Thanks for all of this. Some good advice. What does helping someone else heal do for your own healing?
Recovery is not an overnight thing, and when you are in recovery, you are in it 24/7, 365 for the rest of your life. If you're not working, I heard it said once, if you're not working on your recovery, you're working on your relapse. And so
Right. That makes total sense.
So if I can help somebody else and share where I've been and help them stop what they're doing or overcome things that I've overcome, then in a way I'm still working on myself at the same time, because I'm reminding myself of where I've been and where I've come, or where God has brought me. And so I love helping other people and just seeing how God is using me and using the ministry of Celebrate Recovery to help people change their lives.
How should someone share their story, if they don't feel ready yet?
It takes time. The biggest thing that you can do is just start writing it. Just because you write it doesn't mean you have to share it. But I just tell people, even if you haven't even started recovery yet, which if you're listening to this podcast, it's a recovery podcast, so probably you have. But just start writing your story. Write about your upbringing. Write about where you've been, what you've gone through. If nothing else, it'll be healing because you're now getting it out and you're getting it onto paper. But just start writing your testimony. Start writing the things that you've gone through. And the right time will present itself. Eventually, you will be to a point where you are comfortable enough with your addiction, and you've been able to make amends with yourself and forgive yourself, that you'll be comfortable enough sharing it with other people to encourage them, because you're going to want them to experience what you're experiencing.
Okay. Journal, just journal like you mad at the pen. That's what I say.
Yep.
Wesley, this movement, my movement, is called W.A.R. We're all recovering, right? Because healing isn't something that happens once. It's something we live, right? So when you think about your journey from breakdown to becoming, what are you most grateful for today?
I'm so grateful for the people that God has put in my life, the people that have been my sponsors, the people that have been my accountability team, that I've been able to be honest with when things are going tough, or are tough, and the fact that they were there to love me and support me and point me in the right direction, and just be there for me instead of looking down on me or turning me away, or all those other things. They're just there, and they were in my corner, and I'm so thankful for them.
Wesley, can you please speak directly to the person listening who feels like their life is completely and utterly destroyed right now? What do you want them to hear from you?
Yeah, if that's you right now and you're listening and you can hear my voice and you just feel like you are at rock bottom, your life is destroyed, you don't know where to go, then I'm going to tell you to do two things. Okay? Number one, give it to God. Admit that you're at rock bottom. Admit that you don't know where to go, and give it to Him, and just be honest. Be raw, be vulnerable, right? Have that transparency, because He already knows. And then number two is find a meeting. I don't care what kind of meeting. I don't care if it's AA, NA, SA, and I don't care what it is. If it's a recovery meeting, go and work on your recovery. That's why those meetings are there. Because you're not going to be able to have success until you start to deal with that issues, those areas of your life. And then finally, realize that you're not defined by whatever it is that you're going through right now. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how you were brought up or what somebody did to you. You're only defined by who you say you are and who God says you are. So walk in that and choose to be a better person.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. God first, always, always. Wesley, thank you for your honesty, for your courage, for your willingness to rebuild publicly, and for showing that becoming is possible, even after breaking. Family, if this conversation spoke to you, sit with it, write, reflect, choose the version of you that you are rebuilding. And remember, till next time, each one reach one, stay sturdy, and we're all recovering. Wesley, thank you so much for being with me here today, brother. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Till next time, folks, stay sturdy.
The invasion of Iraq is a good time to take stock. Since the war began, 3,192 U.S. troops have been killed, more than 24,000 wounded. At least 50,000 Iraqi civilians have died.
It's war.